Copilot was poor. People were just like, okay, I'm going to try it because you're asking me to try it, but I'm not going to use it on a day-to-day basis.
I think that's where product leaders really want to dig in, is like, there may be things I forget to specify in the PRD. How do I get the right level of fidelity of understanding what the engineer is doing to be like, we forgot about this edge case, or like share early, that kind of thing.
One of the things that I did was I compiled like the most critical workflows that happen in clinic in just like a simple markdown document. This is like the most important things that we need to take care of in making sure that whatever changes that we're making, we're building new features into our system.
Welcome to another episode of AI Product Leader, where every week we shine a light on what it really takes to join the AI world. Real conversations with real AI builders, founders, product leaders, AI experts, technologists, and everything in between to understand where the AI world is right now and what that path looks like, whether you're building AI products or a career in AI. I'm your host, Polly Allen, founder of AI Career Boost, where I spend my time helping product leaders thrive in the world of AI and transition into AI leadership roles. And I spent my career on both the product development and software development sides of the fence when it comes to developing products. I'm an ex-Alexa AI principal PM, where I successfully launched the very first generative AI answers on Alexa back in 2020, before ChatGPT made it much simpler. And I'm so excited to have our guest join us today. Amri Abuseman is a powerhouse engineering leader known for building quality-first cultures across high-stakes industries, from healthcare and FinTech to telecom and HR tech. And as a director of engineering at Flatiron Health, she's been leading teams at the intersection of software delivery, system reliability, and regulatory rigor. With deep roots in quality engineering and a toolkit spanning AI-driven test automation to enterprise release management, Amri's superpower is aligning product and engineering through clear strategy, technical fluency, and cross-functional empathy. She's the kind of leader who doesn't just ship software, she scales trust. Amri, thanks so much for joining us today. I've been really excited to chat.
Thank you, Polly. That was such a great introduction.
Well, it's amazing to meet leaders like you who do have the technical depth in engineering, but also that product sense. So I thought, to kick us off, you can give us just a little bit more about your journey and background. How did you get into tech in the first place and adopt this crazy world?
Sure. So I got a full scholarship to study computer science and information systems.
Nice.
And so it was like, all right, you had no other choice because everything is decided for you now at this point in time. But no, it was actually really exciting. And I think what was exciting to me was like application of technology in terms of like how we solve business problems. And my first job was a true startup. I came to an office with like 7 employees at the time, and I wasn't even sure if like that was a real company, right? Because in my head, it's like if you go to work for a company, it's like a real job. And you know, my founder at the time was in the office like with shorts and flip-flops on, and he's just like, all right, like, you know, go do whatever you want to do. Like, these are your responsibilities, and you know, like, do whatever you want to do.
So interesting as your first job, because you're like, and you culturally, you're like, that's not what jobs look like on TV. Right?
Exactly. And also, I think like we had a rotation. So the first thing that you did was like you were on customer support calls, and you had to like, you know, hear what the customers are saying about your product, or having to try how to use your product, issues that they have. And I think that's where it started. For me, at least, in terms of like thinking about like when we're building something, like how do we make it easy for our customers to use them?
Exactly. And I don't know if it's just like there's a difference between engineers who think that way first, that are like that way inclined, right? Some people naturally gravitate towards thinking about, well, how is this going to be used? And some are much more focused on the solution. You found that you've always been like, I'm thinking about who's going to use this and how?
I think like after hearing how customers are frustrated with the software that they're using, you know, you sort of like become like the middle layer between them and the engineers, and also in terms of like translating their frustration into solutions, and also in making sure that like as we're building it, we're keeping those things in mind, right? Because, you know, I think like for most product people, it's really easy to think about like how customers are going to be utilizing the systems. But for engineers, it's like, oh, why would somebody do certain thing a certain way? And convincing engineers that, hey, look, you know, sure, this is a cool way of building something, but that's just cool to us and not the users.
Absolutely. I've totally worked with engineers who are like, well, the user can just check this file into GitHub to tell us what they want. I was like, they don't know what GitHub is. What are you What are you talking about? So it does take that ability to like put yourself in another's shoes.
Exactly. Exactly.
Amazing. And so you've got a long history since those early startup days, especially working in like more regulated industries, health tech, fintech. Tell us a little bit how you got into some of these different verticals.
So the first one was bill payments. So this was like, back in the days where people were still sending checks to make their bill payment. And our company accepted payments first over the phone. And of course, after that, online through online payments. And so that was my first starting point. And I think like in that space, like we were also thinking about like regulations around like how do you process payments? How do we make sure that we make the deadlines and also like adhere to like certain standards, like for example, like money transfers and things like that. And then after that, I was in like more of like a financial investment industry
Yeah.
where the regulation around like trading, right, and compliance to like the SOX rules, and I think like it's not that I was looking for those opportunities, but it basically is part of doing business and thinking around like a like how do our software adhere to those rules, and b like how to ensure that as we are building new features or as we're making like new refactors that we can still pass those certifications
Hmm.
is also as important.
Absolutely, right? Getting good at iterating within constraints, kind of
Correct.
the name of the game
Exactly.
increasingly with AI right now.
Exactly. And I think like the second part to it is just like not just like reacting to the regulatory requirements, but also building systems and processes to allow companies to scale and not having to make changes each time there's a change that comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to react, be flexible when things come in. That flexible regulations industries. Amazing. Well, speaking of, you've been battling as director of engineering at Flatiron Health. You've been battling this tension, right? Of like working within a regulated industry where a lot of times companies are not allowed to use ChatGPT or Claude or any LLMs. How have you dealt with that on your teams? And how do you try to give them the flexibility of these new tools without contravening things that would potentially be security risks or just regulatory or compliance risks as well?
So I think like the first part is like, a like building the momentum to a get them to learn and having that curiosity around like the systems, right? Because in their professional life at work, they can't use them. And so for them, it's like, how do we motivate teams to start thinking about how AI can work for them, right? And also like within that constraint of like, what can we use to help us on our day to day, not just be faster, but also like in terms of like being able to understand like the capabilities of the tools, right?
Yeah, what's
So,
possible?
exactly. So at the
Yeah.
time, this was like sometime in 2024, our company had like a knowledge management system in place. And so that allowed us to look at internal documentation and also have a few of the models available so that you can also start chatting about, hey, I have a question about X, Y, and Z. How do I, like summarize something or find information and things like
So,
that?
so you could plug in like a ChatGPT to your knowledge base
So
or
the chat gpt was built on top of the tool, which meant that like everything was within that, I would
you
say,
built
like
a tool that they could use that you could
exactly.
control the regular the access to documents.
Exactly. Even although like things like real patient information cannot be shared on those tools, right? However, I think like in terms of software development and product, things like feature documentation, PRDs, those can be made available, which really helps tremendously, especially when we think about workflows, when we think about research, or even like thinking about like documentation, right?
Yeah. So was that a tool you guys built internally for?
No, we use Dashworks and then we use Creedle for that. And we work with the teams to get all the knowledge, the internal business knowledge into that space. And they built agents to connect to the knowledge base. And so we can search on top of that information.
Awesome. Because I know a lot of people I talk to in more highly regulated environments or governments, a lot of them have gone with something like Copilot from Microsoft, but it's hard to express what's possible when you're limited in your use cases to certain things, right? How did you?
100%. 100%. So I think like what we have also done is that we had Copilot available as part of like the developers IDE. So they had to use Visual Studio Professional or even like Visual Studio Code on their day to day. And so Copilot was available. However, I think like specifically for novice programmers, they didn't find meaningful answers from Copilot
Oh,
when they started chatting with Copilot,
yeah,
right?
interesting.
It could not understand the context of the code as well. And so, like, after a few tries, they felt like it was much more cumbersome for them to rely on the tool and just started writing code on their own.
Interesting. So
Um,
it's actually creating work for them.
exactly. And then eventually we had tools like Cursor and Claude Code made available. And so
Okay.
that was actually, I would say, like a step change in terms of how people interact with the tools. I
Yeah.
think specifically with Cursor, when you can, let's say, have like an AI chat on top of your code that you're working on, it provides like a bigger context around like, hey, like I have a question about a certain thing, and this is how you can answer specific questions that I have. Let's say, for example, around understanding a function or understanding like a piece of code that was changed, like how would that impact the bigger feature
The bigger
set?
picture. Exactly.
Exactly.
I feel like it's when I explain it to non-technical people, the difference, it's like someone walks into a store and says, like, do you have any brown shoes in size 13? And they're clearly not size 13 themselves or something. And you're like, so why are you asking? And like, is there an event? Like, what are you trying to solve for? Right. That you have to go and explain what you're solving for versus imagine, they walk in and you as the person answering have all the context of everything that's going on and what the goals are, right? So if a tool can see the whole code base or even has access to some like documentation about the goals of what you're trying to do, it's going to give better answers, right?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
also it builds the trust in the teams themselves, right? Like especially again, like when you're a novice in anything, right? What you know, and you will do things the way that you know will get the result you need to. Having to trust another tool or system that you don't even know like if it's going to give you the correct answer or not. And for you to have to redo your work later just adds to like the
You're not going
burden of
to,
work, right?
exactly. You're going to work around the tool. You're not going to work with it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
totally. So what kind of adoption did you see initially with those tools that weren't helping so much versus later?
Copilot was poor. People would just like, okay, I'm going to try it because you're asking me to try it, but I'm not going to use it on a day-to-day basis. I think in contrast, when we started like utilizing Cursor, we had a bigger adoption, and also like we had like teams like just started experimenting more. And I think like once people were comfortable, then we started building in workflows into them. Like for example, like having like pre-commit peer review that can help like go through the checklist of things that you need to have before you commit your code. And then
Yeah,
we have another layer of humans reviewing the code as well. So I think those were the things that actually helped the workflow a little bit better. And also, I think the other thing is also like help people ask questions that they may be too afraid to ask either their peers or seniors or somebody, right? And it could just be like something like very simple, right? And sometimes people have this fear of like being judged, of like, I don't know something. And so
yeah.
when they started interacting with like Cursor, I think like they learn more about like the code base. I think it
Mhm.
increases their confidence in learning about code structures. And
Right.
also, I think it provides them with like better context. And the other way of doing it that I've seen also is that interacting with Cursor in producing like architectural diagrams. So, for example, if I'm looking at a particular feature, I don't know what other services are connected to this feature. So I can talk about it, and say like, hey, can you generate like a system diagram for this particular
Yeah.
feature and show me like what other services are connected to it in a, like a graphical form that can be easily seen. And so I think that also helps build that level of confidence. And also as we start thinking about like what could impact change in a particular functionality, it gives us an understanding around, what questions to ask even for the developers as well.
Up-leveling your level of questions. It's so interesting because, of course, that's going to help with new onboarding developers to a new code base. Going back to an old code base, we all know they wrote something 2 years ago. It takes a while to remember why things were a certain way. But I'm thinking also from a product manager, product leadership context. I get asked all the time, how do I, as a product leader, ask the right questions of my tech team? Can tools like this help them produce the right level of understanding for them to ask the right questions?
I certainly think so. And I think like sharing like what I think like we've heard that like when people look at Claude Code, when you look at command line or terminal setting, it's just like, okay, what is this? Like for especially for like non-technical or non-developers, right? It's just like, oh my gosh, like command line, I can't deal with this right now. But I think like once you have like a show and tell or even like just like a lunch and learn session between product and engineers around like, hey, look, these are the things that you can start doing in Cursor or even Claude Code. I think that creates that level of like comfort even
Mhm.
in just like experimenting and also like giving them additional tool on top of like Credo or any like other like AI chatbots for them to
Yeah.
look at like the code base and try to understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, it's giving me a great idea for a tool where you could create like an MCP that could go read a code base and pull in, I don't know, the ability to chat or draw those diagrams. I don't know. I've found that product leaders sometimes, especially if they don't come from a technical background, get really intimidated just by the interface of like Cursor or something. What else do you find like is that barrier? As a technical person, what do you wish product people would do more of?
I think I would say like maybe sharing the context around like how customers are experiencing or even like going through like a particular business scenario, right? And for us, like in the healthcare space, it's like what are the specific clinical workflows that customers go through that's most critical to them, right? And sometimes like there's this gap between engineering and product because we may not all come from like the same healthcare
Yeah.
background, right? And we have product managers in our company that were nurses in their past life and have a better understanding around like, hey, at the oncology clinic, this is what people do. And just having that kind of understanding of how the product is being used or what types of workflows that nurses or even like assistants go through on a day-to-day basis to
Yeah.
assist the physicians in caring for the patients is really, really important, right? Like just for us to start thinking around like use cases when we are building new features or even like thinking about edge cases that may not have been explicitly explained in the
Yeah.
PRD.
Right. Absolutely. Right. And then I think that's where product leaders really want to dig in is like, well, there may be things I forget to specify in the PRD. How do I get the right level of fidelity of understanding what the engineer is doing to be like, oh, we forgot about this edge case or like share early, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. As an example, like one of the things that I did was I compiled like the most critical workflows that happen in a clinic in just like a simple markdown document. And I used that as a basis of like, hey, this is like the most important things that we need to take care of in making sure that whatever changes that we're making or building new features into our system, that these things still work. So by adding that into the context of our knowledge base, whether it's in Cursor or Claude Code, we can start plugging into like, okay, if I'm making this change based on this critical feature set, what are the things that we need to consider that
Mm,
might break or data sets that we might need in order to ensure that like the existing functionality are still working correctly?
amazing. Yeah. So he's working in these tools. A lot of product leaders I meet are like, I'm at the strategy level. I don't need to be down in the weeds actually working in a developer tool. But it's like, but that's where the interface is most powerful, right? Is actually write your rules in English. We're not asking
Exactly.
you, but
Exactly.
most efficient way to collaborate.
Exactly. And also I think the other thing is that like most of these tools, like whether it's Claude Code, Codex, any of those IDE tools, they actually use markdown documents better in terms of understanding the product, right? And so the more that we can translate like PRDs or feature documentation into markdown documents, I think that would serve both the engineering and the product team really, really well.
Right, exactly. It's that extra layer. If you don't know what Markdown is, it is just a text file with some extra formatting, but it's worth learning and just seeing one and getting unintimidated. Absolutely. Well, that's super exciting to hear about how like breaking down those barriers and the kind of tools that have worked because I know it's a lot of companies are struggling with, hey, how do we get this into the hands of our teams in ways that are not going to be risking, legal action,
Yes.
compliance issues, etc.
Yeah. And I think also like our security team is plugged into like the whole process process of evaluating tools. And I think you mentioned MCP earlier, Polly. That's also another can of worms that, sometimes you might think that, say, for example, like GitLab, because we use GitLab as a repository, GitLab may have an MCP available, but if it's not gone through like the security review by our teams, we couldn't use it yet. So all of these tools and plugins and even MCPs would need to go through like some rigorous reviews to ensure that, yes.
Exactly. I think it's under recognized that everyone's been very excited about connecting to everything using MCPs. Nefarious player can put up a server and tell you that when you hit it will do XYZ, and instead it starts scraping your information for credit card numbers or whatever. Like, it is definitely something that can open you up to prompt injection attacks, and so there's a lot of security issues with them to be
exactly. And I think those are some of the things that, I think that's different between like us playing around with tools on our own personal machines and at work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's why there's that gap between what people are like prototyping and imagining versus what's real today. Absolutely. Well, speaking about imagining and then what's becoming real very quickly, I'm really excited to talk about your latest project. So you're taking a sabbatical this year from your current job to actually play with a project you developed during the Blueprint program here with us as a kickstart. I'd love for you to talk a little more about the genesis of Nura and the problems you saw that you want to solve with it. And I'm excited to hear the next steps and plans.
Exactly. So what brought me to Nora is when I looked at, like my grandmother. My grandmother lived up to about 96 years old. And, she had a long life. However, like I think like the last 10 years of her life had not been easy. She was not mobile and she started losing her memory. She was dependent on someone because she couldn't move. And I was reading this book called Outlived, and it talked about like health span versus lifespan. You can live up to 96, but if that last 10 years of your life had not been great, especially like for you to be independent and being able to do things that you would want to do, it makes it harder for you to accept that reality, and also for your family, right? And so I think like some of the things are preventable, and I think like some of the things are things that you can start doing today before you get to that age. And I think with the advent of like modern medicine today, I think the reality of most of us growing to that age of like 90 plus is a reality, right? And also like I'm thinking around like, what do we need to do in order to prepare for that, especially from like preventative healthcare point of view into like diet, exercise, and also like mobility. And like, I think like the best way to prepare for something is just to get ready rather than the problem happening to you and having to deal with it later.
Absolutely.
And so that's the catalyst of where I'm thinking about Nora. So my first point of view in terms of like thinking about solving that problem is on the preventative care point of view, like screening all the different things that you needed to do yearly in order to ensure that, you don't get caught up with certain types of like preventable diseases.
Absolutely. Because there's so much that isn't given to you proactively from things like healthcare companies and stuff like that, right? That are just, they do the bare minimum telling you like, here's some basic things you should be doing, but actually knowing what are some of the most impactful things that you could like pay a little extra for, et cetera, that are going to be the biggest levers for your future health. Is that the idea of like making that information available?
Making that information available, making that research available to you and your healthcare providers, and also like asking, like being able to ask questions about your health, right? And not just let it be like, okay, your doctor's going to tell you everything. I don't think the doctors are going to be able to tell you everything because they have 10 minutes with you at most.
Right, exactly. And I know, especially for women in the healthcare system, there's not a lot of women-focused health research out there compared to how much there is about whether on men and things like that. So being able to use the latest research that's coming out or being able to maximize it. Sometimes doctors haven't, learned a lot of what's specific to women in medical school.
Exactly. And also like, as I'm thinking about myself, like, when I'm busy with work, sometimes I wouldn't even go up to like get my annual health exams, right? Because it's just like, oh, I have to take a day to go do this. No, I don't think so. Right. And I'm like, I'm okay. Like there's nothing wrong with me. And then you skip a year. Exactly. You skip a year and and when you know that this is not really the case as you grow older.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, what is Nora and how does it solve this problem?
So Nora right now basically tracks like the screening tests that you do on an annual basis. So for example, like breast cancer, mammogram, checking for your blood pressure, blood sugar levels, also like screening like colon cancer and things like that.
Mhm.
So I think like the first part to this is like the most important preventative screening that you need to do on an annual basis. Have you done it?
Yeah.
And B, if you've not done it, like do you know what it entails? And and what are the questions that you should be asking your doctor as you are preparing to, or as you make that appointment to go see them and talk to them on your
Oh,
yearly exams, right?
daily exams. And is this personalized? Like it asks you questions to understand a bit about your health. So particularly for me, what do I need to go and provide?
Exactly. I think like on the next iteration of this app, I would also like to incorporate the results from the tests that you had gone through and tracking it, whether importing it from like an existing app, like for example, like you're using One Medical, sharing that information from One Medical into Nora and being able to track year over year, what your blood sugar level looked like, what your blood pressure looked like, right? What your cholesterol levels look like. And also like giving you the capability of managing your own health
Mhm.
without the problem happening to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that sounds so exciting. That's wonderful. So you noticed this problem and you knew you wanted to help specifically with this as part of when you were part of the Blueprint program. How far were you able to build it out? It was 8 weeks.
I I was able to build out the application. I think like one of the things that I also found probably later on is that I think the tools that we used. So for example, I used Claude Code to build my application, and I also used Supabase as like the database on the back end. The thing that I found out later was that the database was not normalized in any shape or
Uh,
form.
okay. And I was like, as techies, we're like, oh no. And like someone who's never built anything would have no idea
Exactly.
what that means
So
or why.
when I looked at it and I'm like, okay, this is not scalable. If I had like 1,000 users, my database is just going to crash when someone's asking for their information. And so I think the first iteration of the product, the first build of it was great in terms of like giving me the hands-on experience of building a V1 of my tool. I think I would go back in and I do need to change some of that data structure, some of the architectural design decisions in order to make it scale better. And I think secondly, it's like I want to hear more from users, from women especially, around like, what are the barriers that are preventing them from managing their own personal health, right? And also I think like all of us have this goal of like, I want to eat healthy, I want to exercise more, and life happens. So I think like just like being able to understand like what are the barriers, what are the things, what are the challenges that people face in terms of like reaching that goal. How do we make it like a sustainable change throughout your life versus it being like, oh my gosh, I've got to spend like 2 hours at the gym this
Yeah.
morning.
Or like, I didn't go this week, so now I need to spend 5 hours at the gym somehow.
Exactly. Just like trying to like making it like, like understanding like, what are the most important things that you need to do? How do you like, carve time? How do we plan for that in our busy schedules?
Yeah, amazing. So you're still looking to talk to women who are looking proactively managing their health and want to understand how to do that better, to maybe look and revamp the workflows, things like that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so interesting because with now that we're all able to quickly prototype a workflow, as badly normalized as the back end may be for scaling, you can see how the valuable thing isn't necessarily building the prototype; it's making sure you're building absolutely the right thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
And also like providing the best experience for the users as well, like in terms of like managing their own information.
absolutely. So is that the plan? Is that how's Omri spending her sabbatical vacation?
So far, like I think I've spent on traveling more so than like building. But I think like, as I ramp down my traveling, I would start building a little bit more. Talking to other technologists who are also interested in building. Met with a couple engineers that are in the similar situation as I am right now. And they want to start utilizing more like AI tools to build, learn from people's experience around like, hey, what worked out for you? What didn't work out for you? What tools? Because I think like just even based on my experience, I think like utilizing like, for example, Lovable was great to begin with, right? And then after a while, it became an expensive experiment once you run out of free credits. And also like from my own experience around like the data, the back end data structure, learning from each other around like, hey, what are the pitfalls that you found during this time, and what are the things that we could do better?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And being able to have this time to explore with the latest technologies. I'm so excited for you. We'll have to do a follow-up podcast mid-year or the end of the year, see how things are going. But I'm especially excited to see exactly if we can engage with the folks who really want to be your target, your target users for Nora and the kinds of impacts you can make. I'm super excited to see where that goes.
Yes. And also the thing that I found very surprising when I was in Malaysia and I was talking to people about the app, my initial target audience was like people like in their 40s or older. And what I found out was that cases of diabetes start earlier there. So you had like women in their 20s with diabetes. And so this kind of like brought me to like a different way of thinking about it in terms of like it's not just about like health span, but also like just like managing your health in general, right? And also like managing like if you already have diabetes, like how do you control, how do you ensure that like your diet and exercise plays into this trifecta of, you know, managing your own health as you grow older as well.
And from a product perspective, it's interesting to think about what the triggers are for someone to really be like, okay, I'm serious enough that this is no longer like a vitamin. I should think about my health, but like a trigger like, hey, you've been diagnosed with diabetes in your 20s. It's something that people would be like, whoa, okay, I need to start taking this more seriously. The healthcare system is failing me, right? So when do they start feeling that pain? What's that scenario? You can model like that is going to be the first thing that's going to grab your users' attention and get them in.
Exactly. Exactly.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm so excited to see where this goes. So this has been quite the journey, though. You've gone from like, hey, I'm using AI in my teams and getting teams to adopt what they can and increase their capacity, to someone who's actually built the first MVP of a product and getting it out there to the world. How did you get started with the building piece, building your own? How do you suggest people go about that?
I would say, like, I would follow this is like Polly's be, do, have model that you had, I think, like you introduced, I think, before our first class. And, you know, at first I was very skeptical about it because I'm the kind of person that must have the have piece, right? Like, I must know about everything. And so my own journey with AI was like, I want to learn about machine learning. I want to learn the history of like machine learning and everything in order for me to master AI. That's how I thought about it. But that was a futile exercise because, as we know, models change rapidly. There's like new tools every day and like capabilities come up like every single week. It was so hard to catch up with it, right? So to me, it's like, okay, this is not scaling well at all.
So like try to learn everything first. So just so people have context on that be, do, have model, a lot of people make the mistakes of going, I'm going to start with having all the knowledge. I'm going to learn everything first. Then I'm going to do something with it. And then finally I can be the person who builds things, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Be, do, have, how did that manifest?
So with how like so by joining your class, and also I think like the forcing function was to have a capstone project at the end of it, right? That really was a catalyst to all of this. It's like in terms of like it kind of forces you to think about like, hey, what's the problem that you want to solve and like what you need to do in order to solve that, right? So I think that really helped me through that journey. And you know, and I think like I want to say like I'm not paid to like, you know, endorse Polly or anything like that here. Let's be clear here, right? I just want people to know that. But this is coming straight from my own experience. I think, Polly, you are like the number one coach in guiding us through like product development with the AI journey. And I think what's important here is that you meet us where we are and, you know, you break down the concepts from like the fundamental level to like intermediate and advanced based on like how you feel and where you want to take it to. So I think like this is like, you know, this is like where I see the difference between like trying to learn things on your own or even like just struggling. Like, for example, you mentioned earlier that like, you know, for some people trying to set up Cloud Code on their own local machine was a struggle, right?
Absolutely. It's not easy.
It's not easy if this is your first time doing it and you follow the instructions and you're like, it's not working for me. What do I do now? And then, I think for most people, when you run into those problems and you struggle, you would give up on doing it, because it's like, okay, I want to try to do this, but this is not really what it is. And this is really not helping me. Right. And so I think like being able to have someone like you that can help people like understand around like, okay, this is the hurdle that you need to go through, and then go do it. Go do it. No excuses. No excuses. We're just going to do it. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to go build something. You have to build something by the end of this course. You have to show something. And that's the forcing function to get something done. And I think it also just like hangups they have about like being perfect, having a great documentation, all of that, right? Because
Perfectionism.
Again,
totally.
You just need to get it done, because once you get it done, then you learn from your experience, and then you keep experimenting, and then you keep learning from new things that are coming in. And, and I think this is really important in terms of like, how do you keep up with the changes that's happening with AI, like every day, every week?
Yeah, that's so true. Like, I think that skill to push through the frustration and actually just keep going. There's a tendency for us to be like, oh, I tried this for 15 minutes. It's not for me. I'm not meant to do this or something. And it's like, no, that's the skill.
That is this. Exactly. And also, I think like, I'm going to put it out there. If people have problems or issues that they have and they want to reach out to me, feel free to do that. Reach me on LinkedIn. Like, let's talk about like, how do I do X, Y, and Z? Please reach out, because to me, sometimes like, when you help somebody go through that hurdle, I think not only that you would remember it well, they would remember it well as well, because, they've gone through that experience. And then I think that knowledge can also help them teach others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's really inspiring, Amri. And thank you. Thank you for your kind words. It's amazing. So if you were to boil down your advice down to one sentence for someone who's looking to start getting into AI, especially if they're not that techie, they're feeling like they want to increase their tech fluency, what would that advice be?
Just start doing it.
Yeah. It's
start
right there.
doing it. Start building it. At the very least, like start prompting about what problems you want to solve or what product you want to build. Let me use an example. My niece, she's 14. So over Christmas break, I wanted to have an activity to bond with her. She does not program at all, but I wanted to like kind of get her into like, utilizing like an AI tool to build something. She built a game. She built a multi-universe game on her own. So all I did was like, I have Claude Code set up for her. I showed her how to prompt, and I gave her like, the structure of like, hey, what should your game do? Who are your characters? Like, what should they look like? What are the rules to your game? Like, you should define that in a PRD. So basically she wrote her PRD.
Amazing.
She literally like wrote her PRD and like she fed it into Claude. And then we structured the game plan for about 7 days. And each day it had like its own plan of like what to do. And she had to verify every single day to ensure like, everything was working.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's amazing. But she built something you could play. You could actually.
She built it. She could play. She had like 7 different universes. It was crazy. And I'm like, why so many? She's like, this is my game. This is what I want to build.
Why? What do you mean? Why not?
Exactly. It was wild. It was wild. And the only thing was that I had to up my subscription.
Which subscription are you on?
I think I was on Pro. And I had to pay like the $100 tier in order for us to complete that game in 7 days.
Yes. Okay. But in a week, right?
In a week. Yes.
I don't think we're ready for like the creativity this could unleash, especially as tokens get cheaper, more energy efficient. It's so exciting.
Exactly. And I also wanted to show her that, look, when we talk about AI, it's not just ChatGPT. You're just not chatting about certain things. You're just not asking questions. You can build something, you can make something. And this is very tangible. And I hope that would like spark some level of like creativity for her in terms of like thinking about like, hey, what do I do next?
Yeah. Yeah, amazing. Exactly. I've definitely found that when people finally catch on, whether it's their first lovable prototype or their first time using code for something, when they get it and they realize what's possible, you can see this light go on. And then I'm like, I'm really sorry to your spouse because you're not going to sleep one night and then
exactly
1 a.m.
Yes.
But the excitement and the kind of fun this brings back to software.
Exactly. And also, like, for someone who is non-technical, who's not really like done anything, she was able to like just run npm run dev on her own, testing
Yeah.
her code, tearing it down, making like changes to like bug fixes. I think like the first time when she saw something that was not working, she told me like, hey, this is not how it's supposed to be. And I'm like, okay, why don't you tell Claude that's not how it's supposed to be? And what should it do? And so I said like that is testing and debugging. And if it's not correct, or if Claude is saying that it's running into problems, talk to it and like explain what you want exactly. And she caught on that and she was like, okay, I could do this.
Right. And we get to the stage where you're like, now always test that this still works after every change you make. That's very
Exactly.
exciting, or it has some memory and persistence.
Exactly. And I kind
Okay.
of cheated a little bit about like asking her to add a prompt to like add some unit test as well.
Ah, when you have an engineering phone a friend, can help you get along quicker, a lot faster, right?
Exactly.
But it's not.
Exactly.
I hate to see people thinking like, I'm not technical enough. You can ask Claude Code, what's the best setup if I'm not technical and I want to use best practices and, want to get closer and closer to working like a real engineer? What should I do? Like, these tools are so good about the education, and it just takes
Exactly.
too.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think like, what is great also is that, building in like the fundamentals, right? Like testing, debugging, and also at some point, like, code repositories, making sure that like your changes are being saved without losing the changes that was made, the last good state.
Totally. Totally. Exactly. And able to roll things back if they don't go the way you want. Now, this sounds pretty technical, right? We both come from engineering background. Folks who maybe aren't so technical, I think the key to remember is that like this comes over time, that like your first stage can really start with, I've got an idea for a problem, and getting really specific about that.
Oh, 100%. 100%. And also, like you said, Polly, like I could be the phone your friend on technical issues if anyone has
Amazing.
questions.
Thanks so much, Amri. I do love about our AI Careers community that you guys are so generous with each other and with others in terms of spreading the gospel of, hey guys, if you want, once you understand what's possible,
Exactly.
world, it's
Exactly.
gonna be yours.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We have time for one more last section, and that is plugs. Amri, I'm sure you would love to plug Noura and the next steps happening there. What could people do if they're interested, if they want to manage their own healthcare a little more proactively?
So please get in touch with me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear about your challenges in managing your preventative care, exercise and diet on top of all the things that's happening in your life. I know that like this is not easy, but I think this is important for us, especially women, in terms of like making sure that you take care of you now so that the future you would be able to do things up to like your 90s or even 100.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's take charge of that right away. And if they want to reach out to you, LinkedIn's the best way.
LinkedIn is the best way to reach out to me.
Oh, fantastic. Awesome. So we'll include that in the show notes. Amri is ready and willing to be your phone a friend. Be careful.
Yes, for sure.
Awesome. From our part, we'd love to plug our upcoming masterclass. We have a free masterclass. So, how to be an indispensable AI product leader and the path to product leadership, how to become a builder leader, the type that builds and shows the other parts of your team the way along the way. This is becoming the most essential skill for product leadership into 2026 and beyond, being able to get hands on, even for those senior levels of product leaders. So, excited to have you join us. We'll have the link in the show notes for that as well. Thanks so much again for joining us this week. Seeing you again next week on our next episode of AI Product Leader. And thanks again, Amri, for joining us. This has been a really rich experience diving into the possibilities and how to get started. Thanks so much. And we really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Polly, for having me. It's been a great journey for me as well.
Fantastic. Awesome. We'll see you later and see you all next week. Bye for now.